There was a phase in Israel's history when everything seemed on the brink of chaos. The unity of the tribes had weakened, for there was no central ruler to keep the people on the right path. In this scenario, accounts recorded in the book of Judges show how both women and men took turns in the mission of leading the nation. Among these figures emerged Deborah, a name that broke all the expectations of a patriarchal society and demonstrated how courage can find its place even when everything suggests weakness. Deborah was not someone who held power by force or temporarily. In Judges chapter 4, she is described as a recognized authority, someone to whom the people of Israel turned for dispute resolution and advice. And in addition to that role as an arbitrator, she received revelations from the Eternal. This placed her in a unique position. She possessed administrative legitimacy as well as spiritual charisma. Her tent, or her palm tree where she listened to everyone, was located in the mountainous region of Ephraim, between Ramah and Bethel. Every day, travelers, entire families, or local residents would come seeking answers. Her name carries the meaning be, perhaps suggesting diligence, cooperative work, and productivity. Whoever approached her would perceive that they were not facing a mere mediator of conflicts, but a woman whose vision transcended immediate problems. Deborah nurtured a sincere desire to see her people free and honoring the teachings received since the days of Moses. At that time, the Israelite territory lacked centralized direction. There was no king. The 12 tribes lived in their own organization, and often each went in a different direction. Many wondered, how long will we remain defenseless in the face of neighboring nations that exploit us? In the midst of despair, Deborah rose as an answer, pointing out that there was a way out, but it would be necessary to cling once again to the Creator and take courageous action on the battlefield. Before understanding how this leader guided the inhabitants to an unexpected triumph, it is essential to grasp the historical context that served as the backdrop for her actions. After Joshua, Moses' successor, completed the conquest of much of Canaan, there was a period of relative stability. However, as the years passed, new generations began to distance themselves from the principles that united them. Influences from foreign cults emerged, and consequently, practices that were displeasing to the Eternal. Judges chapter 2 recounts a kind of vicious circle. The people turned away from the Creator, began to live with idolatry, suffered conquests by enemies, and cried out for rescue. Then a deliverer would rise who restored peace, but when he died, everything would start over. At various times, this deliverer was designated as a judge. Unlike the current meaning of the word, these leaders did not act solely in a judicial capacity. They also functioned as administrators, military commanders, or spiritual guides. Each time a pagan group threatened the tribes, the Eternal would raise someone to unite them and defeat the adversary. Ehud, for example, was one of those figures who brought temporary relief. However, as soon as Ehud died, the nation once again found itself in the clutches of a grave oppression. The text in Judges emphasizes that Israel returned to practicing what was not good in the eyes of the Creator, and thus another dark period was instituted. King Jabin of Canaan dominated vast regions of the north. His seat was in Hazor, and the one who actually conducted the military operations was Sisera, a commander who possessed a technological apparatus extremely advanced for that time, 900 iron chariots. These war vehicles were feared because they could advance quickly across the fields, trampling the enemy infantry. As a consequence, people lived cautiously. Some avoided the main roads to not encounter Canaanite patrols. Villages were subjected to the collection of tributes, extortions, and threats. 20 years of subjugation had left the people saturated with injustices, yet without the spirit to organize a revolt. It was in this climate that Deborah stood out, combining the virtues of judge and prophetess. She heard the cry for help and knew she could not remain idle. Deborah's figure does not appear obscurely in the biblical account. On the contrary, Judges chapter 4, verses 4 and 5 make it clear that she was already known nationally for arbitrating conflicts. The mention of the exact place where she sat, the palm tree of Deborah, shows that her meeting spot had become so renowned that it bore her name. Not only did humble families seek her out, but also tribal chiefs and clan leaders who needed precise guidance. Her reputation came from a unique combination: legal wisdom and spiritual authority. She resolved internal conflicts, perhaps involving land disputes, dowry negotiations, trade agreements, or family quarrels. As a prophetess, Deborah spoke in the name of the Creator, reinforcing that her decisions were not merely the result of human intelligence, but were supported by a higher authority. Generally, one would expect a man to exercise such an office. However, the reality of Israel in those days was not conducive to predictable patterns. Often, the absence of firm leadership opened the space for people who distinguished themselves through integrity. Deborah likely acquired credibility by resolving cases justly and by delivering words that came to pass. Thus, she earned respect across all layers of society. While other male authorities hesitated to challenge Jabin, this courageous woman could no longer stand by and watch her people suffer. She knew the history of the patriarchs. She remembered how the Creator had delivered the people from Egyptian slavery, guiding them under the leadership of Moses. It made no sense to remain prisoners of Canaanite forces when there were promises of protection and prosperity. Then one day Deborah called Barak, a warrior from Kadesh belonging to the territory of Naphtali, to announce something that would completely change the course of those events. The initiative came from her. According to Judges chapter 4, verse 6, Deborah sent word to Barak to come immediately. When he arrived, she conveyed the order that she believed to have received from the Eternal: gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali and go to Mount Tabor. There the Lord will bring the enemy commander down into your hands. These words were not based on suppositions but on prophetic conviction. The leader emphasized that God would lure Sisera to the Kishon River in order to seal the oppressor's defeat. For Barak, fulfilling this command meant embarking on a risky undertaking. His tribes did not have war chariots reinforced with iron, nor were they known for possessing large arsenals. Even so, Deborah's conviction was so firm that he felt the moment had come to try. However, for some reason, perhaps insecurity, or the awareness that the moral leadership belonged to her, Barak imposed a condition: he would only march if the prophetess accompanied him. If Deborah were present, he would know that God was in command of that mission. This request illustrates that many doubted their own strength in the face of a superior Canaanite army. But the presence of the judge symbolized divine blessing. Deborah did not refuse. She told Barak that she would go, but made an important declaration: "You will not receive all the glory for the victory, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Some interpreters think that she was referring to herself, but in reality, there was another person destined to complete the downfall of the enemy commander. The next step was for Barak to gather volunteers. It is estimated that the necessary number was 10,000 men. This contingent set out toward Mount Tabor, a singularly shaped elevation in the plain. The geographic position offered a defensive advantage, as it allowed one to observe from afar the advance of the Canaanite chariots. Moreover, with Deborah present, everyone felt motivated. Previously, the people were dispersed and subjugated. Now merely looking at the confident prophetess was enough to fuel the hope that the Creator would act on their behalf. By deciding to accompany Barak and the soldiers, Deborah also assumed a role of moral and motivational command. The mere news that a woman, historically marginalized by culture, dared to lead an army shocked those accustomed to seeing only men at the front line. However, that shock was exactly the stimulus Israel needed to break its inertia and face a well-equipped enemy. There are few details about the recruitment dynamics, but the narrative suggests that some northern tribes responded to the call promptly. Others, for various reasons, did not send reinforcements. In Deborah's later song, described in Judges chapter 5, she even cites by name some tribes that did not join the conflict. The fact is that Zebulun and Naphtali figured as the main pillars of the offensive, for they were directly suffering under Jabin's tyranny. Mount Tabor became a symbol of hope. At its base, the atmosphere was one of expectation, for no one knew exactly what the strategy would be or how to overcome Sisera's supremacy. Deborah reminded everyone that More important than advanced tactics was the trust that the Eternal does not abandon those who sincerely turn to him. That certainty spread among the fighters, creating a kind of unity that the tribes had not experienced in a long time. When word reached Sisera's ears, he prepared his army to crush that nascent revolt. If an insurrection was underway, his duty was to smash it quickly, demonstrating to everyone that Jabin's dominion could not be contested. In Judges chapter 4, verses 12 and 13, we read that he summoned his 900 iron chariots and gathered warriors at Haroshet Hagoyim, moving toward the Kishon River. He was so confident in his mechanical and numerical advantage that he believed the fight would be a mere formality. However, what Sisera did not know was the spiritual strength animating Israel. Deborah's presence meant that the Eternal had already set the outcome. Even so, the impact of facing those armored chariots should not be underestimated. The Hebrews did not have comparable resources, nor cavalry or reinforced shields. A direct confrontation seemed suicidal, but the judge assured them that they would not fall. On the day the final battle occurred, Deborah saw that the Canaanite troops were approaching the plain. Then in Judges chapter 4, verse 14, she said to Barak, "Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hands. Is it not true that he has gone before you?" This phrase resonated in the hearts, awakening courage, even in those who still doubted. Without hesitation, Barak set off from the top of Tabor and charged against the enemy. The ensuing battle is described in few lines, but its impact was tremendous. In Judges chapter 4, verse 15, it is said that the Lord confused Sisera's army, and in Judges chapter 5, verse 21, the celebratory song tells that the Kishon River swept away adversaries, suggesting the idea of a great deluge or unexpected storm that inundated the terrain. Regardless of the exact phenomenon, the result was devastating for the heavy chariots. Iron chariots, which worked admirably on dry, firm ground, became a trap for their own drivers in the midst of mud. The horses became agitated, Canaanite soldiers were disoriented, and the formation quickly lost cohesion. Deborah, accompanying the assault, perceived that God had fulfilled the promise. With the strength coming from heaven, Israel found the courage to advance against a destabilized enemy. In the midst of the chaos, Sisera was seized by the terror of being captured or killed in battle. He abandoned the stuck chariot and fled on foot. Barak and his men continued their attack, pursuing the remnants all the way to Haroshet Hagoyim. Each destroyed chariot symbolized that the Canaanite yoke was hanging by a thread. The one who had dictated the rules for 20 years was now fleeing in disarray. And the determining factor was the unshakable faith sustained by the leader of the people, who fully trusted in divine intervention. While Barak annihilated what remained of the opposing forces, Sisera tried to save his own life. He withdrew from the battlefield until he reached the region where the Kenites dwelled. This people maintained peaceful relations both with Jabin and with Israel, which granted them a certain neutrality. The Canaanite commander, exhausted and terrified, approached Heber's camp, believing that perhaps he might find refuge there. There, Yael, Heber's wife, received him unexpectedly. Upon noticing the arrival of a fugitive notorious for his cruelty and power, she invited him into her tent. Sisera requested water but received milk. That additional kindness made him feel secure. Then he reclined and ordered her to deny his presence should anyone inquire. Perhaps he thought that a woman would pose no risk. However, Jael was planning something that the commander would never suspect. When he fell asleep, she took a stake and a hammer, striking him on the head and killing him immediately. The effect of this scene was the fulfillment of Deborah's word. The honor will not be for Barak, but for a woman. Adapted from Judges chapter 4, verse 9. But the even greater surprise is that it was not the prophetess herself, but Jael, someone hitherto little known. With a single act, the Kenites sealed Sisera's fate and put an end to the career of the greatest oppressor of Israel during that period. Shortly after, Barak arrived at the camp searching for the enemy. It was then that Jael stepped forward and revealed the dead commander. There, the victory initiated by Deborah's determination on Tabor was complete. Without Sisera, Jabin's power evaporated. The main tool of oppression, the iron chariots, was neutralized, and its leader was dead at the hands of a courageous woman. The celebration of this triumph did not occur solely in gatherings or speeches. It was immortalized through a poetic composition known as the Song of Deborah and Barak, recorded in Judges chapter 5. This work, considered one of the oldest in Hebrew literature, describes details that the straightforward narrative in Judges chapter 4 does not deeply explain. There the reader finds the moral state of the people, the distribution of the tribes in support of the war, the role of each character, and a portrayal of what occurred on the day the Kishon River became an ally. The hymn begins with an invocation for rulers and princes to listen to a glorious account. Deborah presents herself almost as a mother in Israel, someone who rose when the people were without direction. The song spares no praise for the tribes that risked their own lives, such as Zebulun and Naphtali, nor does it withhold criticism from those who refrained, such as Reuben, Gilead, and others. It is a poetic text that makes mention of the heavenly bodies fighting against Sisera, highlighting the supernatural intervention. There is a particularly emblematic passage where the mother of Sisera is described waiting for her son to return with war spoils, while his concubines comfort her by saying that he is merely delayed dividing the gains. This scene exposes the contrast between the oppressor's expectations and reality. Sisera would never return, for he lay lifeless in Jael's tent, a victim of his own hubris. The song, besides celebrating the feat, makes a point of praising Jael as the most blessed among women. In the end, the grand conclusion emerges. May all the enemies of the Most High be consumed in this manner, but may those who love him be exalted like the sun in its splendor. The message is clear. The victory originated not only from arms and strategy, but above all from divine support and the courageous obedience of Deborah and Barak. From that triumph, the nation enjoyed 4 decades of tranquility. Judges chapter 5 verse 31 closes the story by noting that Israel was at peace for 40 years. That long period of peace suggests that Deborah's leadership brought not only the defeat of Jabin, but also a moral and spiritual reorganization. When the people followed her guidance, pagan rituals were set aside, and the tribes were able to resume agriculture and commerce without fear of invasions. Deborah's name was marked forever, for she exemplified the uncommon courage to command an army in a society accustomed to men in power. Her protagonism went beyond the mere act of judging. She became a military guide, a divine counselor, and an inspiration for women and men who witnessed an unprecedented victory. If Barak's faith was revealed on the battlefield, it was thanks to Deborah's influence that this commander rose. And if Jael dared to raise her hand against a formidable general, there is no doubt that the trust in the God that Deborah proclaimed was part of that impulse. It is possible that after Deborah's death, Israel returned to the old cycles of idolatry and servitude as often happened. However, while she lived, the nation prospered. Her story transcends the centuries, serving as an example of how a determined person can transform oppressive realities, even with scarce resources or in a limited social position. The difference was not in the weapons, but in the firm character and the certainty that the Creator acts on behalf of those who seek justice. Deborah was much more than a fleeting figure in the biblical timeline. Her impact echoes to our days, reminding us that in adverse situations, courage can arise from the most unexpected places, and that conviction based on elevated principles is capable of subduing even a superior army. Without her, Barak might never have gathered sufficient forces to face Sisera. Without her prophetic voice, Israel would have remained delivered to apathy and fear. Without her faith, the tribes would not have united to expel a secular dominion. She stands out as one of the few women to exercise leadership functions in the Old Testament period, and she did so masterfully, synthesizing in her profile the legal, prophetic, and strategic dimensions. While many would be content merely to arbitrate disputes, Deborah went beyond. She broke through passivity, invited the people to trust, and firmly took charge of a movement that, from a human perspective, might have been seen as madness. If this story inspires you, we invite you to delve even deeper into the texts of Judges and the other historical books of the Old Testament. And if you wish to continue following us for curiosities and lessons about the Holy Scriptures, subscribe to our channel, share this content with friends and family, and leave your like. The more people hear about Deborah's courage, the greater the chance of seeing leaders emerge with the determination to face modern oppressions and bring liberation to those who cry out for a chance to live in peace.